Hey, what's up guys? So I recently sold my full-frame DSLR that I had been using for a long time as my primary photo camera, and then once I got the Canon R as my backup photography camera, and I just sold it like I said and bought a backup full-frame mirrorless camera. And so I know that a lot of people have been asking and talking about, is mirrorless the future? Are DSLRs dead? And I wanted to kind of talk about in this video why I switched to completely full-frame mirrorless and my thoughts about whether mirrorless is the future and whether DSLRs are dead, and give you some thoughts to maybe think about if you're thinking about buying a new camera or buying into a camera system, and should you invest into mirrorless and should you avoid DSLR? So first of all, let's talk about DSLRs. And here's the thing, DSLRs have been the standard for photography for almost a couple decades now. And in the last 10 years, they've become a major staple of especially indie filmmaking and videography. Mirrorless cameras, on the other hand, were not very trustworthy or reliable, but they have started becoming much more dependable and much more capable in the last few years. So for a long time, for instance, mirrorless autofocus was not very reliable and definitely not something that professionals wanted to use. But over the years, even what DSLRs had as their live view autofocus has become much better. And now in a lot of cases, autofocus performance is way better and more reliable in mirrorless than it is in DSLR, because with mirrorless you're focusing directly off the sensor and there's not the possibility for that little bit of difference between how the viewfinder is focusing and how the sensor is focusing. Another benefit of mirrorless cameras is that, well, there's no mirror there. So with your lenses, the rear element, the back piece of glass basically, can be much closer to the sensor. That means that light rays have to be bent much less in order to hit exactly on the sensor, and that can produce a much sharper image. Now, that's theoretical, and of course, not all mount systems allow for that as much, and even in the same way. And the lens itself, the optics have to be designed well in order to take advantage of that, but the theoretical advantage is there, and a lot of mirrorless lenses are taking advantage of that. One thing that a lot of people point to with mirrorless is that mirrorless cameras can be smaller, and they can be smaller, but that's not always necessarily an advantage. With a smaller camera comes a few things. First of all, less room to hold on to, and thus potentially a less comfortable camera. And I say this a lot, but something that you hold in your hand all day when you're using it needs to be comfortable. It also has a difference in how the camera is going to balance with lenses. So if you're using big lenses and have a tiny camera, it's not going to be comfortable either in most cases. So the idea that just smaller in and of itself is an advantage, sometimes it definitely is, but I don't think it's necessary in every mirrorless camera. So are DSLRs dead? I think it really depends on what you mean by dead. Current DSLRs that are already out there, have not become any less capable of making great images than they were a couple years ago or when they were released, just because there are mirrorless cameras that have some cool advantages to them. I think the current DSLRs that are on the market are easily capable of great image quality and will continue to be capable of great image quality. On the other hand, it does look like development within the world of DSLRs has slowed at best and probably is not really going anywhere. For most of the larger camera companies, there are some smaller camera companies that have committed themselves to continue development on the DSLR. So like I said, DSLRs are still capable tools that we can take great images with, the same way that photographers and videographers have been using DSLRs for the past decade or more. So why did I go full mirrorless? And honestly, that was never really the plan, at least not anytime soon. I went for the Canon R, which is the full frame mirrorless, Originally just because I was impressed and excited about the camera. I have been impressed with the camera since getting it and have really loved the camera and the advantages that it has. Definitely some of the advantages that it has because of being a mirrorless body were things that drew me to it, but I didn't have any plans of completely leaving using DSLRs anytime soon until it just kind of happened that I came across a really good opportunity to trade my 6D toward an RP that I just honestly couldn't pass up. And I will say that since I have switched to having the R and the RP as my main and backup camera, I've definitely enjoyed the fact that I am completely within that system, but that has a lot more to do with the features and the kind of compatibility of the two cameras than it does with the image quality, because the 6D continues to be able to produce great images. But because the RP has features and just really functions, honestly, very similar to how the R functions, I'm more inclined and more likely to actually use the RP more frequently than I did with the 6D. And with the RP, and this is just because the RP is a newer camera and the 6D is an older camera, I'm more inclined to use that for video because, again, of the features, especially autofocus features that the RP has that the 6D didn't have. But again, that's because of the age of the camera, not just because it's a DSLR. And with having the RP versus the 6D, my camera bag is lighter, it's a much lighter camera. And now that I have two RF mount cameras, it makes much more sense to start investing and start thinking about investing in RF lenses, which are really, really great lenses and were honestly a big draw to the R system for me in the first place. So will I go back to using a DSLR at some point in the future? Honestly, I don't see that happening, certainly not professionally. DSLRs are still fun to use. I like shooting through an optical viewfinder. It's definitely a different experience. And something like the 5D Mark III, that's a really fun camera to shoot with great image quality. And I could definitely see the idea of having one of those as a backup camera more just for fun. But if I'm being honest, I don't think that that's very likely to happen, and I really don't think I would invest in that professionally now that I'm already within the mirrorless system. Like I said, one of the things that drew me to the Canon mirrorless system was the RF mount, and it makes more sense to be completely within the RF mount system. And having enjoyed the performance of the RP so much, especially in conjunction with the R, it kind of just reinforces that decision. And at this point, I don't see a reason for me to go back to DSLR. So should you avoid DSLR? I don't think so at all. Again, DSLRs are still capable of the same great image quality that they've been producing for the last decade or more. And honestly, because so many people are moving toward mirrorless right now, the used DSLR market is actually really nice. You can get some really high quality cameras at a really nice value because people are switching to mirrorless so often. And even current DSLRs from Canon and Nikon, for instance, are great camera options, and they're going to continue to be great options, viable options into the future. And specifically with those systems, if you at some point do switch over to their mirrorless line, both of those camera companies have adapters that allow you to use your DSLR glass seamlessly on your mirrorless bodies. So starting in the DSLR realm and then moving over to mirrorless later is really an easy transition. Again, I don't really think we're going to see a lot of DSLR development going forward even from this point. But again, DSLRs are a fun way to shoot, and an optical viewfinder versus an electronic viewfinder has a lot of benefits. You're able to see your exposure and exactly what your image is going to look like, but an optical viewfinder gives you kind of more of a natural feel because you're actually seeing things with your eye. And some people actually complain with electronic viewfinder that it can give them headaches or make them nauseous and that kind of thing. And there are definitely way different qualities of EVFs out there. So you need to pay attention to that as well, because a less quality EVF is going to be much more frustrating to shoot with. But in the end, they're both tools for making images, and either way, you are going to be capable of making great images with those tools. You just have to think about which one's going to be the best for you and the most accessible for you, and what the best option for you at that time is going to be. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. In the comments below, let me know. Are you shooting mirrorless? Are you shooting DSLR? Are you thinking about switching from one to the other? If you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button. See you guys.